Jamie with the Volusia County Public Library. In this video, we're continuing our watercolor series, and we're going to be using our palette to make a color chart to show how our paints can go from dark to light. You will need the following: a large sheet of watercolor paper. This is the full 9 by 12 inch paper. Your set of watercolors, however many or few colors you have, will work just perfect for this exercise. You will need a brush and a jar of water. Let's get started. If you are new to watercolors and have not watched my first video, I recommend watching that before moving on with color theory. We're going to talk a little bit about color theory before we start painting today. So I have a basic setup of a color wheel here to help us go through it. Our primary colors are red, blue, and yellow, and they form like a triangle on the circle. And our secondary colors, which we get by mixing our primary colors, are orange, green, and purple. They form kind of the opposite triangle here. Tertiary colors are created by mixing a secondary color and a primary color, like blue-purple, red-orange, or yellow-green. Cool colors are your greens, blues, and purples, and warm colors are reds, oranges, and yellows. Complementary colors are opposite each other on the color wheel, like red and green, blue and orange, and yellow and purple. Monochromatic is a color and its tints and shades, which is how we're going to make our chart today. We'll be creating a chart with each color and its tints by adding water. You can also create shades by mixing it with black. We're going to be using a full sheet of watercolor paper. If you don't have a larger size, you can of course use whatever you have on hand. I do recommend using the watercolor paper. Because I'm not going to be using too much paint or water on the paper, I'm just going to be doing wet on dry and doing kind of rows of my colors. I'm not worried about taping my paper down. It's just a practice exercise. I'm not going to be using it for anything, so I'm not too worried about any warping or anything on me. It shouldn't do too much. So I'm going to take a look at my palette here. I have a lot of colors. I could go through and do this for every color I have if I wanted to. I'm going to go ahead and just choose a red, an orange, a green, a blue, and a purple for this activity. If you have less colors, you can of course do all of them. If you have more colors, you are welcome to do your whole palette and work your way through the exercise. It's a good way to get to know the colors that you have in your watercolor set. So I'm going to go ahead and get my brush wet. You can see my water has already been used. You can start with fresh water. If you're already in the midst of working with watercolors, you can use what you have. It's kind of a personal preference. If you're worried about dirty water or not, you will hear different professional watercolorists have different opinions on it. I'm not terribly picky with mine. So I'm going to get my brush nice and wet. I'm going to choose a red to start with. And because I have the cake pigments, I'm going to go ahead and activate it and start picking up some pigment. So what we're going to do, I'm going to kind of visually think my reds are going to go in a row, and I'm going to do a couple of different swatches with them. So I'm going to start with lots of pigment on my brush, and I'm going to do just a little swatch. I'm going to take my brush, dip it in my water, maybe tap off on my side there, a little bead came off. I'm going to do another swatch. I'm going to dip again, take a bead off, swatch again. And I'm going to continue working my way across the row. I wouldn't make them too big because then you're going to be able to see a greater variation. So even these two were kind of close. I could go back and try and pick up some paint from that to make it a little lighter, but I'm not too worried about it. So you can see I'm not going back to my paint. I'm only using the original paint I had on my brush, dipping it into the water after each one, wiping it on the side a little bit, and painting again. So you can see it's getting lighter and lighter. This is the same paint I started with. We're just adding more water and less pigment as we work our way across. So this is how we get that monochromatic look, the tints, by adding more water to watercolor. So if you were using a different type of paint, this would be what you'd do by adding white to the paint. So I've gotten to the end of my row. You can do as many swatches across as you'd like. It would just continue to get lighter and lighter and lighter. I'm going to go ahead and clean off my brush, and I'm going to do a different color. So I'm going to go ahead and do an orange. I'm going to activate the paint. My brush was nice and wet. I want to pick up that starter pigment, lots of paint, and I'm going to kind of move to the next row and paint a swatch, a little more, a little bigger. I'm going to dip it into the water, take some paint off. So you're going to continue with this. You can do as many or as few colors as you'd like. It's just a way to see the different tints you can get with the colors that you have. So even if you're working with a limited palette, say maybe you just have one of those 8-pan student starter watercolor kits, you can still get a large variety of colors by tinting it. Or when you start doing paintings, depending on if you want a softer, lighter color, you can achieve that just by adding water. So you can continue this with the rest of the colors that you'd like, and I'll meet you back here. So here is a color chart that I did earlier, and as it's dried, you can see that some of my swatches have this distinctive ring around the outside, where others do not. This might be because the yellow is very light, but they don't have that ring like that. This ring happens when you have a lot more water, and then the pigment kind of moves to the side as it dries. It's not right or wrong, it's just a different technique. So if it's something you're looking to achieve, you know you want to have a lot of water on your brush. If it's something you're looking to avoid and don't want that edge on there, then you know you need to kind of have less water when you're painting. So it's just something I wanted you to be aware of. Watercolors can kind of have a mind of their own as they dry. So you might paint it one way and it might dry and end up looking another way, which can be frustrating for some working with watercolors. I kind of find it an interesting part of watercolors that you never quite know what you're going to get. You can control some of it up to a point, and then there's some point where the pigments in the water is going to do its own thing, which is part of why I've enjoyed starting to play and experiment with watercolors. I hope you have enjoyed learning how to start exploring with watercolors and creating a color chart today. In my next video, we're going to play with shapes and blending colors to create an abstract piece. If you're interested in more watercolor ideas and techniques, you can check out these books and more at your library, as well as the Creative Bug database. And remember, stay crafty, Volusia.